Okay, welcome everybody and welcome back. So we're going to have a really interesting talk this evening about London's rivers and obviously about outfall safaris as well. You could already kind of see popped up on the screen. Just a quick introduction to the speaker, Sam Facey. He's currently based in Regent's Park with ZSL as a Wetlands and Estuary Project Officer. He's done various other interesting things before that, which I don't think I have time to talk about this evening, but maybe another time, including work in Malawi with Carnivore Research Malawi, which was a really interesting study of urban hyenas and human and wildlife conflict. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Sam, for our talk on London's rivers.
Great, thank you. Yes, so as kindly introduced by Maria, I am Sam and I work for the Zoological Society of London, specifically in the Estuary and Wetlands team. So all my project work is essentially around the waterways in London. And today I want to talk about our Outfall Safari program, and then there's a little snapshot of our Water Voles program at the end as well. So first things first, just kind of bring it back to the basics. So freshwater systems are disproportionately biodiverse ecosystems compared to grasslands, all that kind of stuff. And within London, we have about 600 kilometers of freshwater system. So there's huge opportunity to support quite a large amount of biodiversity within London itself. But like anywhere at the moment in this time and age, there's a lot of threats facing this biodiversity. So we have barriers, for example, so barriers to migration, barriers to habitat. We've got habitat loss. And then one of the ones I'm focusing on today is water quality. So issues around water quality, pollution, eutrophication, all that kind of stuff. So sadly, about 14% of the rivers in the UK are in good ecological condition, which is quite a disgraceful statistic. And none of them are in good overall none of them are in good overall health. And so there's a lot of work to do, and a lot of this pollution is in the form of phosphates, ammonia, nitrates, heavy metals, and the whole other array of chemicals that we aren't even aware of in the system. So yes, there's a lot to crack on with. And in 2019, every single river assessed in England failed its chemical health standards. So there's a lot of issues with our rivers. And there's a good report by the Rivers Trust as well. I've highlighted at the bottom here, but some good subsequent reading if you're interested. So a lot of people get confused with the sewage systems in London. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen issues with CSO. So this is your combined sewage overflows. And this is meant to be permitted sort of release of sewage in high storm or high rain conditions. But as I'm sure most of you are aware, a lot of this has been happening illegally. And sadly, this is not the only form of pollution we're facing in the UK. So when you see headlines like raw sewage spills in England, or Thames Valley uses a sewage system, it's not great. But unfortunately, that's not the only story as well. So what we're looking at is a more chronic but background source of pollution. So this is mainly from misconnections of appliances and household, cross connections in sort of the pipe system. We got blockages in pipes and also failing assets. Excuse me. And as I said, yes, it's not to be confused with combined sewer overflows. So this problem with polluting outfalls is a major threat to water, especially in urban areas. And this occurs when you have your separate sewage and surface water systems. So your surface water system is when rainwater is siphoned off from the river and is meant to enter the river as it is. So it enters the river untreated. And then you have your foul water system that siphons off all your kind of foul wastewater off to sewage treatment plants to be treated. And the issue arises when these two systems are cross-connected and your foul water enters your surface water system. Sorry, excuse me a second. I'm battling a cold, so my voice might go a bit. Yeah, and on average, 3 to 4% of properties in London have a misconnection. So you can see this problem is quite widespread. And when you look at London itself, the purple areas here show all your separate sewer systems. So you can see the purple is where you have your foul and your surface water. And then the orange highlighted in the middle is where you have your combined sewer overflows or your combined sewage system. So we expect the problems of misconnected outfalls to be in this kind of outside of the central London area. So when you have a polluting outfall, essentially what is entering the river is sewage, any type of detergent that you might put down your sink or in your washing machine, any oils. If there's issues arising in an industrial estate, you'll have industrial waste. So I've seen paint in the rivers, and also any physical product that you might put down the toilet. So any kind of sanitary products, anything like that, will all enter the river when these kind of connections happen, or when these misconnections happen. And this is what it typically looks like. So you can see the bottom image is your discolored water. So that's could be some kind of chemical or paint. And then your image at the top is your sewage fungus. So this is a bacteria that grows in the presence of high organic loads, and typically that's as a result of high ammonia, high phosphates, and sort of sewage. So you can see it's really nasty, and it's something that wasn't really known about as a source of pollution. Pardon me. So as I said before, prior knowledge of this impact of this source of pollution was relatively unknown. And so outfall safaris were created to try and address this gap in knowledge and really kind of generate the data that's needed to address these problems. So there's four main aims of an outfall safari. So the first one is to systematically inspect and record the outfalls. Second, to assess and report the pollution. So this is normally reported Thames Water. Thirdly, is to build the evidence of the scale of the problem. So, largely we work in London, but we're also expanding the program outside of London. But we have no idea really how this type of problem affects our rivers on a national scale. And also, fourthly, to raise awareness. So, a lot of people might be, promoting a healthy ecosystem and a healthy water environment, but might inadvertently be contributing to the problem by having misconnected appliances in their own households. So we try and raise awareness in the participants that also engage with us. So Outfall Safaris are a citizen science program that was developed by ZSL, the Rivers Trust, EA, and Thames Water to address this problem of polluting outfalls. Excuse me. And so this typically involves a systematic survey of a water body. So initially, after a training session, this is done by volunteers. So they run bankside surveys, reporting and scoring outfalls where they come across them. And then the second part of the survey is in-channel survey. So where volunteers can't get access to the river, we will then go in and fill in those gaps that they couldn't get access to. The data is then fed back to the local water company, which in this case is Thames Water. And that gives details on the location of the outfall, the level of pollution, and also the areas covered, because also, some areas you can't get access to, and there might be big problems there as well. So at least we make them aware of what hasn't been covered. And all this data goes back to Thames Water and becomes part of their SWAP program, so their surface water outfall program, which is the program which tries to mitigate these problems or these sources of pollution. Excuse me. So what do surface water outfalls look like? So typically they're large pipes. They can come in a range of shapes and sizes and will be spaced irregularly along a riverbank. So quite often you'll come across, in a concrete channel, for example, you'll come across a series of smaller pipes, regularly spaced. These will be more your land drains, whereas outfalls are typically big and quite hard to miss. So part of the program is the main component of the program is training volunteers to go out for us and score these outfalls. So once they've been trained on how to do this, they go and choose their sections of river, which they can complete in their own time. So typically we have a month period where sorry, excuse me, I'm just going to mute myself while I have a good cough. That's better, sorry. Yes, as I said, volunteers, having completed the training session, will go out and survey a stretch of river in their own time. And typically we allow a month for this period, but it's very weather dependent. They also trained in how to use an app. So we use an app called EpiCollect 5. And this allows the user to record the location of where they are or where the outfall is. They'll allow them to score the outfall based on the visual and aesthetic impact. They'll also allow photographic evidence to be taken. So that's, the extent of the pollution, how far it's going downstream if it is, and also mark any inaccessible areas that they might come across to help us later on with our in-channel surveys. And this is a very useful app to allow us to really make sure the data is coming into us without any data going missing, essentially. Sorry, my slides just frozen a second. There we are. Yeah, so we score outfalls based on two kind of main categories. But the types of pollution we're looking at, I've already mentioned it briefly, but essentially we're looking for RAG, which is your physical products that you flush down the toilet. You also got your discolored water, as you can see in those middle images, and also your sewage fungus. So this kind of grey bacteria that really, it's very noticeable and it can be quite smelly as well. So quite clear cut signs of a polluting outfall, essentially. And the next slide just kind of shows some of the ones I've come across. Last year, for example, we were in the Brent by Wealdstone Brook in the Brent catchment. And we came across some of these nasty outfalls that actually were quite polluting. So clearly there's a lot of issue going on. And this problem, especially in these outer reaches of London, can be quite extensive. So how we score outfalls. So as I mentioned, we look at two kind of main categories. We got the visual impact of the outfall. So this is kind of how far from the outfall is the pollution having an impact. So is it within 2 meters? Excuse me, sorry. Or is it, between 10 and 30 meters? And this score, you get a higher score for the greater extent of the pollution. And so that's your visual impact. And then the second one is the aesthetics of the outfall. So this is looking more about actually what the pollution is. So sometimes you might get a slight discoloration in the water. Sometimes there might just be a small amount of sewage fungus. But this can go all the way up to, a lot of, extensive amount of sewage fungus that covers the whole riverbank and can go on for 10 to 20, 30. I've even seen it with 50 meters before. So it can really go quite a long way. And yes, typically we have a scoring system. So the impact score is, as it's clearly stated on the slide, is the combination of these two scores. And typically we have 10 as a threshold. So anything above 10 or equal to 10 is something that we deem to be highly polluting. And so if myself or some colleagues or if the volunteers come across an outfall that they deem to be this polluting, then the training then suggests that they ring Thames Water on their pollution hotline. They kind of report that problem straight away. So at least it then starts that process of remediation. And typically Thames Water come out within 2 hours of getting a report along these lines as well. And I'll go into more detail how you can report these later on. And then any outfalls that score less than 10 are added to our report, which we then send through to Thames Water at the end of the programme. Sorry, just bear with me, my slides are a bit slow. There we are. And so one thing we've tried differently this year, the outfall safaris is a continuous process. So they started in 2016, and we try and resurvey the river every 4 years, just to kind of build up a bigger picture and a longer data set of the type and extent of the pollution and the kind of history of the pollution in the catchment. So previous years, we realized it's quite hard to track individual outfalls between the different surveys. And so what we wanted to do, working with Thames Water, is have a way of having a unique ID for an outfall, so that going forward in 5, 6, 7, 10 years, we can kind of track the pollution history of individual outfalls. So essentially what's happened this year, and it's kind of a trial process, is that each outfall has been given a unique ID. And this will help us, really nail down the detail of how often these pollution incidences come online, because the annoying thing about outfalls is that, or polluting outfalls, is that it's a continuous process. You might fix one and then a few others might come online. So, if we can work out where the hotspot areas are, then it might help with prevention, in the future. So as I said, each outfall was given a unique code, and each outfall also had a unique what three word reference. And so during the training session, volunteers were trained to use EpiCollect 5 and the what three word app, which allowed people to input the unique ID code onto the EpiCollect, so that we can attribute that the pollution from that outfall to a unique outfall code, and basically allows us to kind of slowly build up that long-term data set. And so it's a trial at the moment, and come winter this year, we'll kind of review it and see how it's worked. But so far, it seems to be working a little bit, seems to be working quite well, so that's good. So towards the end of the program, as I mentioned, we send a report to Thames Water. So this has locations of the area we surveyed. So here, for example, looking at the Upper Brent and Dollisbrook, you can see the dots are all the outfalls that were surveyed, and the blue areas are all the areas that were surveyed. So in some circumstances, within a catchment, we might survey, up to 40, 45 kilometers in total. So, and that might be with only 20 volunteers. So a lot of effort by our volunteers does go in, and they play a massive part in collecting this data. This data of which as well is shared to other catchment partnerships as like a baseline to kind of indicate where pollution hotspots might be. And yes, this report contains locations of the outfalls themselves, kind of evidence of the pollution that was occurring when we came across them. So you can see this one at the top here, image 1, image 2, and image 3 really show a lot of sewage fungus coming out of that outfall and extending quite far downstream. And so this one would have been recorded as a 10+ and reported to Thames Water. And so that's all included in the report as well. And we also share with them the data set itself. So each outfall with its location, who surveyed it, and kind of details on the type of pollution that was seen. And then finally, when we're conducting our in-channel surveys, we'll include the access details of how we got into the river, so that when they come to do their checkups, it makes it easier for them to get in as well. So just to look at the outfall safaris that we've done to date. So in total, since 2016, about 583 kilometers has been surveyed, which is quite a huge undertaking, really, thinking about it. And in total, that's 3,427 outfalls that have been assessed, and that's engaging 420 volunteers. So yeah, as I said, a phenomenal effort from our volunteers. Unfortunately, that's meant that there's been 117 outfalls that scored 10 or above. So that's 117 outfalls that are deemed highly polluting, and one of the major problems contributing to the health of the rivers in London at the moment. So just moving on to this year. So this year we were looking at the River Crane. We had the Beverley Brook, the Edgware Brook and Silk Stream, and also the River Rom. So as I said, this is the 4 we're doing this year, and so we're at the latter stages of the project now. So we're starting our in-channel surveys when the weather permits. But due to the success of the program as well, we're now expanding it to outside of London. So this year we've also done Swindon, we've done Reading, we've done Banbury, and we've done Oxford, Slough, Maidenhead in the past as well. So really kind of broadening our patch of where we're operating, and it's essentially anywhere within the Thames Water operational area is where we kind of open to conducting outfall safaris. And generally speaking, we found that outfalls haven't been as badly polluting outside of London. It seems that London at the moment is a bit of a hotspot. So this is a slide that I've stolen from Thames Water. So essentially this shows where, so as I mentioned, their SWAT program. Their SWAT program is the Surface Water Outfall program, and essentially is the data we collect feeds into their program, and then they use this data to go out, identify the polluting outfalls, and kind of start that process of remediation. But it just shows, actually, you can see the blue dots are the ones on the waiting list, and the orangey brown dots are the kind of ones on the program at the moment. But you can see they really match where the foul and the surface water systems are. You can see there aren't any in the central London area. And typically what they found as well is that north West London, sort of Wembley, that kind of area, has been one of the really bad hotspots of finding lots of badly polluting outfalls as well. But as I mentioned, these outfalls, it's, you know, with all this new development going on, and the general sort of aging of all the Thames Water assets, these problems are coming online all the time. So it's a constant battle of, you know, you might fix one catchment and another bunch of houses are, you know, added to the system or wrongly applied. So it's a constant battle to try and keep on top of the outfalls. And this tracking of outfalls, individual outfalls, will really help work out, you know, what are the real problem areas and how can we kind of start addressing that. Sorry, my voice is being a bit croaky. I've continue. And so yeah, again, this is a slide I've also stolen from our partners in Thames Water. It just kind of shows, so looking at specifically the missed connections. So sorry, that put me off there. Yeah, so looking specifically at the missed connections, Thames Water, in their kind of search for the issues, have found that kitchen sinks, washing machines, and hand basins are the kind of main culprits for misconnections. And so once they come across these issues, they send the letters to their clients, and there's often about a 90% voluntary rectification rate. So that means that the people will fix the problem themselves. But you know, as I said earlier, there's also issues with failing assets, blockages, which all contribute to the whole outfall problem, or the polluting outfall problem. If you're interested, there's a page called Connect Right, which is the kind of the public facing you know, push to really raise awareness about these issues of misconnections. So that being said, there are limitations with the outfall safari. So there's a degree of subjectivity when looking at outfalls. During the training session, we try and calibrate everyone to have, you know, get them practicing on how to score an outfall, because doing it for the first time, it can be quite hard to distinguish what's polluting, what's not, or how bad the pollution is. And these outfall safaris, they're conducted during summer period, and it's only a snapshot behavior. So the volunteers go out and serve their section only once. You know, so it's sometimes it's a bit of chance. So sometimes they might come across an outfall with a misconnection that happens to be polluting, and sometimes it might not be polluting. So there's some you know, some issues with luck if you're going to capture that pollution or not. Also, overgrown vegetation that can also you know, really affect the visibility and often lead to some outfalls being missed. To try and combat this, we try and run our outfall safaris kind of early springtime. And as I mentioned, not all areas are accessible. Even with in-channel surveys, sometimes there's areas we just can't get to. So, you know, it's likely we are missing some as well. And also, there's the assumption that clear water is non-polluting. So often we'll come across outfalls that are running clear water. And hypothetically speaking, the outfalls, we conduct the outfalls during dry weather. So we have at least 48 hours of dry weather before we go out to do a survey. So technically, if they're connected to a surface water system, there shouldn't be any water going through them. I'm just going to ignore that. So when we see outfalls with running water going through, you know, clearly there's something wrong there. And often, this year, for example, we've taken some water quality sensors with us, and have found actually some of these outfalls flowing with water quite high in ammonia. So there's other issues going on there as well. So outfall safaris aren't the silver bullet, but it's a good step towards actually, starting that process. And unfortunately, there's lots of other sources of pollution in London, like road runoff, which are kind of slowly slowly people are becoming more aware of that as well as an issue. So just a quick overview of London and bringing it back to the bigger picture. So as you can see, this is data from 2019, but the orange shows also the yellow shows rivers, or essentially it shows that all rivers in London are either moderate or in bad health. So it really shows that actually, London rivers have improved, but there's still big issues facing it. And hopefully Outfall Safaris with this kind of long-term program will hopefully address some of that anyway. So just kind of moving on to, kind of opening up to see how you guys can help. So first is about knowing what the signs of pollution are. So if you happen to be out and about, make yourself aware of what you think of what pollution is, or what specifically, outfall pollution is. So that if you come across it and you're unsure, you know how to report it. Also, probably one of the biggest takeaway messages from today is to check your own plumbing and your own drainage system in your own household. This is one of the major issues of pollution from outfalls is your own plumbing system. So there's a link there which I can share around after of how to check and make sure your house hasn't got any misconnections. And also, yeah, as I mentioned, be aware of how to report any pollution you might see. So Thames Water have a hotline number which you can call, but they also have a online reporting platform which makes it a lot easier. So if you do come across a pollution, whether it's outfall related or any other type of pollution, please do report it. There's also, an EA number there as well, which you can report to. If you're feeling a bit more adventurous, then there's also other things you can do. So you can join an outfall safari program. So if you follow the link or click on ZSL London Rivers, we have a page where we advertise. You can sign up to our emailing list and we advertise any opportunities going forward. So looking into 2025, at the moment, our plans are to survey the Longford River, the Upper Lee, the Roding, and the Hogs Mill. So if you're in and around London, then there's a good opportunity to get involved. But there's also plenty of other citizen science programs out there. So our partners in Thames 21, South East Rivers Trust, for example, have loads of different ways you can get involved as well. And that's not just necessarily outfall safaris, that's other kinds of river monitoring tools. And I'll mention one briefly now. So I'm sure some of you have heard of riverfly monitoring. This is essentially a method which looks at aquatic invertebrates. So insects have different sensitivity levels to pollution. So we can use this as a proxy for river health. So in highly polluted rivers, you might expect only to see a certain number of species because they're only tolerant to a certain level of water quality. And in cleaner rivers, you might then expect to find your mayflies, for example, or your caddisflies, because it shows that there's clean water there. So this is a great tool to help with long-term monitoring and kind of see the effects of pollution. So typically in London, RMI scores vary between 1 and 10, which is not great. If you look at an unimpacted chalk stream, you get scores of 16 to 22. So this long-term monitoring is a really good way of making sure that we're really getting a good understanding of our rivers. And it helps be the front line of, if a pollution event does occur, you have that data set to show how this kind of aquatic communities change in response. Wow. And it helps build up pollution and helps build up evidence where pollution is occurring over time as well. And so chronic outfall pollution in a catchment will lead to a chronic low RMI score. So it's really good data and it's really good effort. It's really important, to really, do these surveys, do these long-term aquatic monitoring surveys as well to help build that evidence case. And this is just an example I've pulled up from our kind of previous work, which shows that you can see the RMI score was varying between 4 and 6, up to 8, and then at some point it breached a trigger level, which is a level set that if the RMI score drops below this trigger level, then it kind of shows that a pollution event's happened. And this is what's happened here. So this wouldn't have been caused by an outfall. It would have been more related to sewage work, I think, but you can see how it works in principle. Right, so that's my sewage tool done. Thought I'd have a little water voles of presentations as well, just to show the other work that I'm doing at the moment. So part of our work within London, so we run the London Water Vole Recovery Programme. And so this is a programme which is trying to restore resilient, self-sustaining water voles in London. And our work showed that, our baseline work last year showed that there were remnant populations within London still. But many of these points were old. So you can see the lighter colours are the newer bits of data and the darker colours are older. And actually there's quite a lot of older spots on there. So although it kind of showcases where we think they are still, there's still an issue with data and the age of the data. And so therefore uncertainty of where water voles are still. And actually we know some of these points have since, or some of these water vole populations have since gone extinct, largely due to mink. And there's also issues around here with unreliability in the ID skills or the quality of the data. So these data are public sighting data provided by Giggle. But for example, one of the data that we filtered out was the explanation behind it was a large water vole in central London coming out of a bin. And I'm pretty sure that wasn't a water vole. So stuff like that, it kind of brings in some uncertainty. But this is kind of our best estimate at the moment of where they are. And so part of this program now is part of this program in 2024 anyway, is kind of building on how do we go from the remnant populations we are now, or looking at now, to bringing back resilient, self-sustaining populations. And so there's a few ways you can get involved. Again, simply looking for voles. So they are still in the city. And so all it takes is you looking down in the river if you happen to be walking past, and being able to report that. And so I'll tell you how to report that in a second. If you are, have permission from a landowner and have more time in your hands, then you can set up a water vole survey, which kind of feeds into that national data trend. And then one of our major efforts this year and linking with the wider countryside is eradicating American mink. So these are the principal threat to water voles, and one of the major reasons why we've seen a massive decline in them, both nationally and within London. Oh, the video is working. Okay, great. Yeah, so looking for voles. So as it says on the slide, they have a huge dispersal ability, up to 7 kilometers, in a short space of time. So you never know where they'll end up. So it's always worth looking out for them and just familiarizing yourself with what they look like, where to look, in nice riparian verges with lots of in-channel vegetation, and also getting to know their field signs. And so you can find all this kind of information online. The second way to get involved is reporting any sightings you think you've seen to our data portal created last year to kind of really hone in on the data collection aspect of this project. So this portal provides information on how to ID a water vole, how to look for its field signs, whether that's the latrine droppings, the feeding stations, the burrows, and also how to distinguish between a water vole and a rat. Which is, even for me, and I've only seen a few water voles, it's quite hard to do sometimes, especially if you get only a brief sighting. So it's a really good, useful tool if you are living in London specifically, of helping us really work out where water voles are still. And also it's the same for mink. If you come across a mink sighting, then please do report it via this portal as well, because that also helps us with our planning. Excuse me. So one of our main pushes this year as well is setting up these transect survey sites. So in the wake of mink eradication, we expect that the remnant water vole populations will start expanding naturally again. And so we're setting up these sites across London. It's essentially a 500-meter transect, and it will help. It's a 500-meter transect, which you look for field signs of water voles, so the ones I've previously mentioned. And it's a once-a-year survey, and it again will help us build up this long-term data set to see how and if water voles do start expanding and at what rate, that kind of data. So if you are interested, then please head to the People's Trust for Endangered Species website as well, where you can get some more information. And finally, bringing on to the kind of this year's biggest part of the project, is essentially looking for spaces where we can see resilient populations being restored, essentially. So we work on the principle of bigger, better, and more joined up. So recovery needs, the way water voles exist are in meta populations. So imagine a catchment with lots of small different spots of water voles that are all connected and all interact with each other. And some populations might go extinct one year, some populations might go extinct another year, but as a whole catchment, they remain relatively stable. And so that's how water voles work. So we're looking for sites across London specifically of where there's enough space of good quality habitat where we can restore these populations. And so some of the interventions that might need to be happening is, simply improving the habitat by, improving the vegetation, maybe doing some de-shading, or improving the connectivity if that's kind of just restoring the habitat between two patches. In some cases, it might be a case of just letting it happen and letting the water voles recover naturally. And I think in an urban context as well, we'll be specifically looking at reintroductions or translocations where, within the catchment themselves, they're isolated from any other catchment, but within that catchment, they might have some great habitat which will allow these kind of populations to persist. So if you do have any sites in mind, feel free to send me an email. And on that note, any questions?
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to stop the recording.